Thank you. Moving to the public hearing, we have scheduled tonight one public hearing on the proposed TIF districts on South 4th Street and Sycamore Road. At this point, I will...
I was going to say, when you open
You want me to open the public
please do.
hearing? Let me go ahead and open the public hearing. And yes,
Yeah. I know there's a number of speakers this evening, but before that, if I can ask Mike Weber from the city's TIF consultant from PJV to give a brief description as to the use of these TIFs and the eligibility. So, Mike?
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. What I'd like to do is read a couple of items just for the record and give a very brief overview of what the TIF proposals are about. First off, this hearing is being held pursuant to the Tax Increment Allocation and Redevelopment Act, otherwise known as the TIF Act. Copies of the redevelopment plans for both proposed TIF districts have been on file with the City Clerk's Office since May 3, 2013. The plans, which include the basis for eligibility of the proposed project areas, have been on file since then for the public to review. City Council set this date for the date for this public hearing at its regular meeting of June 10th. And then notices of the hearing were sent via certified mail to all taxing districts on June 11th. Additionally, notices of the availability of the plan were mailed to all persons registered on the Interested Parties Registry and to all residential addresses within 750 feet of the boundaries of both proposed TIF areas. Appropriate notices have been placed in the local newspaper, and notices have also been sent to all property owners within each proposed TIF area. On 3 different dates, there was a meeting of what's called the Joint Review Board. The Joint Review Board is made up of the various taxing districts that levy a tax within the boundaries of the proposed TIF districts. Again, they met on 3 different occasions to discuss the proposals and deliberate and analyze the information before them. At their meeting of July 24th, the Joint Review Board, by a majority of vote, recommend that the City Council approve both TIF districts redevelopment plans. The proposed plans for both areas really are designed to do 3 basic things. One, they're designed to provide a financial incentive tool to induce private investment in property improvements and redevelopment. It's also to provide a mechanism to help finance some public improvements in each area to the extent TIF monies are generated within those areas. And then it's ultimately the goal of both plans to reverse the decline in property values in both areas and to create a stronger tax base over the long run. And in closing, pursuant to the Act, the City Council may introduce ordinances to approve the plans, establish the redevelopment project area, in other words, the TIF district, and adopting tax increment financing for those TIF districts no sooner than 14 days from the close of this hearing and no later than 90 days from the close of this hearing. With that, Mayor, I'll turn it back over to you to allow for public comment.
okay. And those dates might turn into August 26th is the earliest, and I believe November 8th is the latest date that those actions could be taken.
Right.
That's correct.
2 weeks from today's meeting, and then
November 8th.
November 8th, okay.
And that's to introduce the ordinance. You wouldn't have to necessarily pass them, but you have to introduce the ordinances by them.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Let me call on the public comments that are registered. We do have several. I assume you were done, Rudy? Okay.
Mayor?
Yes.
Monica has
Alderman O'Leary.
As I was going through the packet, I see pictures of my shop in this area. Do I need to refrain from these?
Is that after next meeting she has to go down there? Or?
At the time that the TIF projects were originally contemplated, we had contacted each of the aldermen and inquired if any of you had an interest in property that was potentially included in the TIF. My understanding was that you didn't have a lease that had a long enough term to constitute an interest that would, under the TIF Act, invoke a conflict. So it would depend on the term of your lease, but my understanding is that back many months ago when this originally came up, that issue was reviewed.
Okay.
Has that lease changed?
I don't have a lease.
Okay.
So it's not a conflict for purposes of the TIF Act.
You don't own the property.
No.
No.
Okay. Okay. Let me turn to the public comments then. Lynn Franciscus. If you don't mind, please state your name and address.
Lynn Fazekas, 422 Lucerne Lane. That's in the 4th Ward. Mr. Mayor, I have a question. I'm sorry. I have prepared remarks. However, the gentleman's overview, the TIF consultant's overview brought up a question for me, and I'm wondering if I might be permitted to ask that question.
You can certainly incorporate that in your comments, Lynn.
Okay. All right. Then I'll start with the question, and that is, I am unclear on the part of the TIF Act that permits one joint review board for all TIFs. I'm not sure that I've understood it that way myself. I thought that TIF districts required a joint review board for each TIF district. Can that be answered?
Want to answer it?
Okay.
Yes, there is in fact a separate joint review board for each TIF district. When we had these meetings, we opened one meeting for the South Fork TIF and then another meeting for the proposed Sycamore Road TIF. It just so happens that various taxing districts appointed the same person to serve on both joint review boards, and that's not unusual at all.
Thank you.
I have one more question, and that
Lynn.
question is
Lynn,
whether,
could we not get into a dialogue, but if you could incorporate the questions, we'll record those and respond to you in due order.
okay, then my first remark is that if the same public at-large person, for lack of a better term, serves on all of the review boards, if that is true, I don't know if it is, then I would consider that to be improper. Okay. I'm not thrilled with the TIFs. I'm not thrilled with the proposals. I'm not against TIFs. I'm against TIFs. I'm against these TIFs for a number of reasons. I'm going to address the TIFs in general, and I will also address the South 4th Street TIF. One is, this is not our priority. Our financial consultants who submitted updated reports and recommendations in June say that we must get our financial house in order. Strategic planning, we need to do better. On June 11th, in this very room, twice and in so many words, the consultant said that if Dekalb does not change its ways, it will be back in the same sort of financial crises as it was during the Great Recession, and that this would occur within about 5 years. The EPI report is a blueprint for the operational improvements that we need. The proposed TIFs are not part of that blueprint and would be distractions from the work of figuring out how to provide basic services a few years from now. The TIFs would also mean more debt at a time when all of our revenues, almost all of our revenues, are flat and expected to remain flat for the foreseeable future. Second reason, regarding the South 4th TIF exclusively, I note that the school district is not wholly in support of this plan because it would affect them adversely. I likewise cannot support any plan that would take dollars away from the schools, and that would be for the school's sakes and also for our sake, because we spend about 64% of our property tax dollars on the school district. Reason 3, also regarding the 4th Street TIF, much of the plan is a vague intention to buy up properties, demolish old buildings, and market them as commercial properties. In fact, the only very specific plan in this redevelopment plan right now is for water main replacement, and I would surely like to know why all of the water bills that I pay don't pay for my water mains. So I have an objection on that. Anyway, this model of the buying up and demolishing and marketing for commercial ventures have been used to no avail in the central area TIF. In fact, according to the tax increment financing annual reports, since 1999, the amount of public investment in the downtown has been about $12.5 million, compared to private investment, of $7,100 spent on 14 downtown TIF projects. TIF is supposed to generate private investment and expand the tax base. So using this standard of measure, it's been a colossal failure. Perhaps this has something to do with what our financial consultants, bringing that back around again, said about collecting stories about Dekalb's being the most business-unfriendly community that many business owners have ever encountered. Regardless of that reason, though, at this point, South Fourth Plan would only be repeating past mistakes. Reasons 4, 5, and 6 have to do with getting a few things done before we talk about opening new TIFs. We need to get the new city manager in here to see what he or she thinks.
We're over 5 minutes.
We need to strengthen TIF accountability. We need to propose plans that the city feels confident enough to finance with revenue bonds instead of general obligation bonds. I'm done. Thank you.
Moving to the second speaker, Mac McIntyre. And I'd ask the speakers to please respect a 3-minute period for comment, if you will.
My name is Mac McIntyre. I live at 118 Oak Street, and I was under the understanding that this was a public hearing and not public comments. And I think there is a difference statutorily between the public comment and a public hearing. I think the purpose of a public hearing is for the public to gain information about the spending of public monies. And so a 3-minute limit, I understand everybody's pressed for time, but this is the public's one and only chance to ask questions.
And
so
I would offer
disappointed.
that there will be opportunity for public comment when the TIF districts come back in ordinance form as well.
And again, I'd remind you the difference between public comment and public hearing. I worked on the Dekalb Comprehensive Plan in 1996 and in 2005. The 1996 Comprehensive Plan was, I thought, one of the better efforts by all of the governmental units to come together and actually put together a comprehensive plan. I worked with Mark Bernanke, for example, on writing the Dekalb Park District comprehensive plan when they were for that. And what we were able to do then was to bring all the taxing bodies together, and everybody was doing comprehensive plans. And I think the 96 plan was a good one. It was updated in 2005, and I participated in that to a smaller degree, but I participated. The big difference that I'm seeing now is, contrary to our position with developers, we're telling developers, don't bring your plans in here piecemeal. We seem to be revising the comprehensive plan in pieces. And we're using TIF as a mechanism for funding these projects. And if we're going to do the comprehensive plan, keep the word comprehensive as an important part of it. And make it inclusive of all citizens and not stakeholders and members of business organizations. There is a difference. All citizens are stakeholders of this community. When you have public input sessions and charge admission, you do exclude part of the community. So as this TIF plan was put together, there was exclusion going on. Earlier it was brought up worries about competitive bidding and the lack thereof. Well, if you're inclusive, and if the aldermen go out to their constituents and tell them about the registry of interested persons for TIF, then you're going to get input from your constituents as to what they would like to see. Instead of, well, you didn't attend a chamber meeting or a renew meeting or another meeting, and so you're just out in the cold. I would urge the council to be inclusive in this TIF project. I would also, and as a member of the Budget Advisory Committee, Finance Advisory Committee, I know we had extensive discussion on this. I've heard talk from people saying, listen, the people don't have vision. We have to have vision, and that's why we need to move forward with these projects. Let those with the vision pool together and buy TIF revenue bonds instead of financing the TIF with general obligation bonds, because you're committing the full faith and credit of the city of Dekalb on the vision of a select few. The reason TIF is supposed to work and the reason you use TIF revenue bonds is the buyers are going to scrutinize the plans far more than they will if they're general obligation bonds. And that protects the taxpayers. It also rewards the bond buyer because naturally you would pay a higher interest rate for that. I am very concerned. I filled out a Freedom of Information Act request that was evidently partially fulfilled because the information request fulfillment indicated to me that there was only one TIF review board and not one for each TIF district. And I say that because what is lacking for there to be separate ones, even if they are the same people, is the approved agendas and the approved minutes clearly indicate that there is one board. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Carrie Mella?
Mayor,
Yeah.
can we get some clarification from the city attorney on the differences between the public comments and public hearing as far as time limits by ordinance? I don't mind that the last two speakers went to 5 minutes. They had something to say that held our interest, but are we bound by no limit?
Different types of public proceedings have different rules for participation, and the City Council has the ability to prescribe reasonable constraints on them. I would say there's a continuum of what those constraints can consist of. At one end, in just a general public comment, you have more ability to impose constraints. At the other end, in a zoning hearing, for example, participants may be entitled to ask questions or even engage in cross-examination of people that present testimony or evidence. The TIF public hearing is intended to be, I believe, a public hearing of discussion, not necessarily a public hearing involving cross-examination. But to the extent that someone is providing public comment, I think in the interests of an open discussion the council would be advised to permit someone to make their comments, although I still think if someone keeps presenting the same information or cumulative testimony, you could cut them off.
Thank you.
Thank you. Kerry?
I'm Kerry Malott. I live at 22872 Malta Road, north of Malta, a couple miles. I'm not a citizen of DeKalb. My primary residence is north of Malta. However, I have interest here in town. In particular, I'm very connected with the school district. I'm on the Finance Facility Advisory Committee. I sub-chaired recently a committee that looked at parity and equity across the district for facilities, looking as to how we might spend that $21 billion construction grant that we were given by the state. Let me give a little perspective from someone who lives outside the TIF district and even outside the city at large, and why I believe, and again, I'm here as a private individual, although I do have connections with the board, 428 school board. Let me point out that a TIF district will pull money by way of the school district, which is Cortland, DeKalb, and Malta, from those adjacent communities into DeKalb. Now, people that live outside of DeKalb, they may benefit from a TIF if they, for instance, come to shop or obtain services or something to that nature within the city. However, it's quite possible, because a TIF has a time period of 23 years and can be extended under some circumstances, that the school district and perhaps other entities, the sewer district and other governmental bodies, might in fact need to raise their tax rates and create greater revenue as a result of loss of that tax increment over that 23 or greater period. So that's my reasoning as to why I should be able to speak to the council tonight, and thank you, by the way, for this opportunity. So there's that issue, and I think that a lot of people don't realize that when you have a TIF in a particular municipality, especially in a home rule municipality like DeKalb, quite often people in the outlying areas that are somehow connected, in this case through the school district, no one seems to remember or understand this connection, this very financial, very definite connection. As Ms. Fasikas pointed out, about 65% or so of our tax money in property taxes goes to the school district. So it is a very significant issue. As to how long a person ought to speak in one of these things, thank you very much, Mr. Frieders, for your explanation. The city's budget and the school district's budget are both north of $60 million a year. Both very large entities, almost similar in size, but with very different responsibilities. As a member of the Finance and Facility Advisory Committee for the school district, I've become a little bit more familiar than I was, say, 10 years ago with budgets and revenue streams and expenses and so on. Interim Manager Espiritu gave a presentation to the school board a couple of weeks ago or so on the two proposed TIF districts. To remind everyone, perhaps, that it was there or heard about it, and to inform those that weren't, the school board, contrary to what tonight's agenda would seem to indicate with respect to positive information coming back from the Joint Review Board, the school board, in fact, approved the TIF district that would support the TIF district for the north side, but in fact rejected and would not, under the circumstances presented, support the TIF district for South 4th Street. Now, I don't think I've met anyone yet who doesn't agree that something needs to be done on South 4th Street. But as Rudy presented to us, the specifics, the financial specifics of the South 4th Street TIF as proposed include a very large shortfall in that TIF increment that will be gathered in over the years, and a problem with the revenue stream. Now, having read the proposal and the information that is now online and has been for quite some time, I understand that, as Mr. McIntyre pointed out, general obligation bonds could be issued to fund that work, those projects. That's where I have a really large problem, both personally and in my understanding as someone sitting on the advisory committee for the schools. Generally, the notion of a TIF is to incentivize private development. Unfortunately, as I've seen the information so far, and please correct me when you can if I'm wrong, but it appears that the Southside TIF district will not be self-supporting and over time will not bring in enough money and will in fact need revenue streams from other places. And that brings me to my final point for tonight, Protanos, the former auto parts. I looked up yesterday the EPA's database on brownfield sites and see that the city received a $100,000 grant apparently. In 2003, it was active until 2009. It's no longer active. But there appears not to be any sort of release letter. There's actually two different kinds of document that can be filed by the Illinois EPA that would indicate that something can move forward. That $100,000 grant, as I understand it, could have been used either for Protanos or for the former Sawyer Auto Imports property on East Lincoln Highway. I don't know how it was used, whether it was part or both of those properties, something I'd like to find out more about. But I'm very concerned as an engineer regarding the EPA issues and environmental hazard issues at the Protanos site, which is a part, as I have seen the map at least, of the South 4th Street TIF. And that is perhaps the single largest potential for additional grade cost. As far as I can tell, it's unknown at this point. I would like to know more about that. Perhaps city staff can inform me. But as things stand right now, I see great hazard and unknown risk in the South 4th Street TIF project, unlike the North Side project, which seems to be fairly cut and dried. It seems to be a standard TIF offering. And so I would encourage council and staff to look at this more deeply. Perhaps one more thing, I believe it would be wise to wait on these TIF proposals until a new city manager is installed. Certainly a new manager would be greatly and deeply involved in operating and pursuing all information necessary to make these TIFs successful. So thank you very much. I look forward to further development in DeKalb and a good situation on the south side, but I'm quite concerned with what I see so far. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Kerry. I would ask, is there anyone else in the gallery that wishes to speak to the issue of the TIF districts before us in this public hearing? Seeing none, I'll move to close the public hearing at this point. Do we need council action to close it? Okay. I declare the public hearing closed then.